Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. On today's episode, I spoke with Dr. Stephen Grocott, the CEO and Managing Director at Queensland Pacific Metals. Queensland Pacific Metals is listed on the Australian Stock Exchange under code QPM. QPM is focused on developing the Townsville Energy Chemical Hub, TEC, which will be a modern and sustainable battery metals refinery. The TEC project has incredible environmental benefits, as Stephen discusses on the show. Stephen talked about the nickel and cobalt demand for electric batteries and how QPM is positioned within the market. We talked about the offtake agreements that QPM has secured with General Motors, LG Energy Solution, and POSCO. Stephen talked about the timelines to complete the project and how the company is securing energy to run the facility. Now, this episode is a fascinating insight into how the battery refining industry is going and where it can go next. I hope you enjoy listening. So, hello and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. I'm your host, Ben Kostrich, and joining me on the show today is Dr. Stephen Grocott, the CEO and Managing Director for Queensland Pacific Metals, or QPM as it's seen on the ASX. So, welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Ben.
I was going to say, we're sitting up in level 51, overlooking some beautiful skyline of Perth, and we're touching on the fact that you used to work at both the buildings opposite us of Rio Tinto and BHP. But how have you got yourself into the industry, and tell us a bit about QPM as a business?
Yeah, sure. I'm a metallurgist by profession with a PhD in chemistry, which is actually pretty handy when you're in the battery chemicals game. After my PhD, I decided that academia, no way did I have an atom of interest in that.
Not a fan.
And no, not a fan. They have their place, but my place wasn't with them. So I joined Alcoa, where I ended up being one of their senior technical experts in their global alumina refining business. Great company. Ultimately ended up with Rio Tinto, where I was their global GM in charge of their processing technologies, new projects, M&A, tailings, process safety, rehabilitation, but mostly around new projects. It's a lot to cover, but I had a really, really good team. Before that, I had a similar, more technical role with BHP, where I had 100 folks scattered around the world on projects. And in that time, I had a lot of time in the junior sector as well, small companies, and that really appealed to me because I was able to bring big company excellence, but with the nimbleness and speed in decision-making that only small companies have. And so here I am with Queensland Pacific Metals.
And how did you get involved with them to begin with? And I assume it would have been quite a few years ago that you first got approached to become the CEO and Managing Director, but how did that whole process begin? And tell us a bit about what the company is actually doing.
Well, I regularly get approached by headhunters, executive search people, and they've got a tough job. I actually respect the job that they do, but I had one who was a friend, and he said, "Oh, can I have a talk with you about an opportunity?" I said, "Sure, I'll have a coffee." He told me about Queensland Pacific Metals, which at the time was known as Pure Minerals. I was aware of them. I'd been following them. I was aware of the direct nickel process that they were trying to commercialize. I always knew the process would work, but I thought it's going to be a hard project to get up. But I took a closer look at it and I thought, actually, this is better than I thought. And the time has come for it. And here I am.
Yeah, and that was the interesting point we were talking before air, was this direction towards these electric vehicles and the push for battery technology. And we should say that, Queensland Pacific Metals, it's located in Queensland. And the main project is the Townsville Energy Chemicals Hub, or TEC, which I'm sure people will have seen around the place. And if you haven't, that's the abbreviation. But talk to us about the exciting project of TEC and what it's all about.
I'll go back a bit in its history. In Townsville, there was a very big nickel producer, the Queensland Nickel Refinery, that had been through multiple owners. It ended up with Clive Palmer, and in 2016, it was shut down. It's an old, energy-intensive process. The market was poor at the time. Plant was shut down. Some of our founders of QPM had very good relationships with the miners of ore in New Caledonia who were supplying ore to that QNI refinery. And the Queensland government approached them and said, listen, is there anything you can do? We've now got mass unemployment with a skilled workforce. Is there anything you can do with this ore? And our founders knew that the government would not tolerate an old, dirty process with vast amounts of tailings and a big footprint. They were aware of the direct nickel process, and that's what got them on the journey. They took a look at that, licensed the technology from the owners of that patent, and QPM have made a huge amount of improvements to commercialize it and de-risk it. And that's the project that we have at the moment, the tech project.
And in regards to the standout qualities of it, I mean, I've listened to a few other conversations you've had about just the ability that there's no waste, or there's so many factors, but can you go a bit more detail about it? Because I think it's quite a fascinating project with all its benefits and net benefits and lack there of carbon emissions. It's just an insane project, really.
At the risk of terrifying or horrifying some people, I'll use a bit of chemistry here. People have known for 150 years that nitric acid is a fantastic way of dissolving rocks. Assay people and analytical chemists have used it in laboratories for years for dissolving minerals to analyze them. But it's had limited use in commercial production because nitric acid's 4 times more expensive than sulfuric acid. But if you can recycle that nitric acid, that cost differential disappears. Now, nitric acid's been recycled in the chemicals processing industry for decades and decades and decades. But in the mineral processing game, we tend to be a bit myopic, not being aware of that. The inventor of the technology just said, hey, why don't you mineral processing guys just recycle the nitric acid just exactly the same way that we do in the chemicals industry? So bang, that's what gets the cost down. Now, the good thing about nitric acid is it dissolves everything, which is great. So most mineral processing operations, the listeners would know, are really fussy eaters. Your dietary control is critical, otherwise the patient's going to die. Whereas the QPM process, maybe it's an unfair analogy, I describe it as a dog. Yeah, you put any food in front of it, it's going to eat it. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I'm picturing my dog now, and it literally goes after everything. So I think listeners would quite appreciate it. But when we're looking at this growing EV market and the batteries in particular, how do you see QPM is quite effectively positioned for this really, as we said, this straight line direction that everyone wants to go in towards batteries?
The first thing to look at is the market growth. EV growth is enormous. 14% of the world's cars being produced today are electric vehicles. That is driving a huge demand for the lithium-ion batteries, especially for the nickel and cobalt for the higher range, upper end of the market batteries. So the nickel and cobalt growth is huge. Now, EVs are a green game. In most of the world, people don't want to jump into an electric vehicle where the nickel or cobalt's being sourced by dodgy means, be it environmentally or treatment of indigenous populations, etc., etc. So clean green production is critical in the non-Chinese world. So QPM meets the market. We are very fast to market. To build a gigafactory, you can do it in a couple of years. But to get your nickel supply chain in place,
that's
10 to 15 years in a Western or developed country, 7 or 8 years in a lesser developed country. Gigafactory, 2 years. Where's my supply chain? So we are fast to market. We'll be in production in about 3 years' time.
And when you're looking at almost this golden opportunity with the supply chain from start to finish, you've also got some incredible offtake agreements already signed. I mean, the one that jumped out to me was the GM, which was announced probably most recently, I believe. But you've got GM with General Motors, you've got LG, which is a huge battery producer, and another one, POSCO, which maybe some listeners would have heard of, but maybe not. But getting those sort of signed off already is a huge testament to the company and yourself and the team. But how did you go about getting those conversations started, and where's the future for those sorts of agreements going?
So when we started talking to some of these people, we were quite a small company. Limited traction. Our market cap was 5 or 10 million. We interacted with a company called Harp Capital, who had a very close relationship with a lot of the Korean end users. They got us in the door. We started to tell the story, and LG, who are the second biggest battery maker in the world, said, "Hey, I really like this.
I want to get a
and
piece
they
of
come
this.
on board. They came on board as an investor. POSCO joined them. POSCO have a lot of processing experience, so they took a technical look at us. They liked it. So LG and POSCO came on board as investors. With GM, they actually approached us. We didn't approach them. We were starting to get recognition for fast to market, super clean production, and plug straight into the battery supply chain. So GM approached us.
Yeah, and I mean that's again a huge idea, because GM is, for those, I mean, a massive car manufacturer in the US, and clearly the demand is just ever growing now, and all these car manufacturers are looking to almost get further into their supply chain, as opposed to traditionally where they want to either invest in mines or manufacturing or processing plants. So it is huge, but you've got these three giant contracts almost secure. I'm assuming they're going to be taking up most of the supply that you'll be processing. So in that regards, it's now about ramping up activity and getting the tech facility up and running. But then next, I mean, is there the future growth potentials of building other facilities and expanding to other jurisdictions, or what's really the optimistic thought processing of where's next?
Yeah, you're right. Between those three companies, we have binding offtake agreements for 100% of our production. So if we produce it, we have to supply them. If we're producing it, they have to buy it from us. So they are legally binding. So we've got no more product for sale, which is
a good thing to have in a way.
It's a brilliant thing.
Yeah.
I mean, name a project developer that's got binding offtake agreements for 100% of its production. That is phenomenal. And on top of that, GM said, if you build a second plant, we want 100% of that offtake too. So this is just remarkable. I don't think the market understands the power and value of having secured binding offtake agreements with three tier one, highly credible, well-financed companies.
Yeah, I mean, the names that I saw, they're not sort of run-of-the-mill or names you have to Google. You already know exactly what these companies are and the reach they have across global markets. It's massive, and that sort of leads itself to, well, I'm sure they've got this urgency for you to sort of get going, and they want it as quick as possible. So when you're looking at the timeline for getting the tech facility up and running, what are you sort of looking at in regards to getting it optimized and getting it running and starting to produce these products for these companies?
So we're aiming for final investment decision late this year. It's about a 2-year build, and then we commission and first production by the end of 2025 is what we're targeting. That plugs straight into the massive growth and ramp up, particularly outside of China. So it's perfect timing. I can't claim brilliance on our part for all of that. There's a lot of luck here, but as they say, I'd rather be lucky than clever, and we are certainly lucky with the timing of this project.
And then in regards to support, I'm sure the Queensland government is rather supportive, or even local governments. I mean, is there incentives from their point of view to really get this tech facility up and running as well?
Yes, we're in discussions with them in terms of debt funding. We are well advanced with discussions with the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility. They're going through their due diligence on us at the moment. They could be there for up to $250 million in debt. The same for Export Finance Australia. So that's the Australian government. But earlier this year, we announced that Export Development Canada, were there for $400 million debt. The Korean Export Credit Agency, K-Shaw, have already given a letter of intent. Euler Hermes, the German Export Credit Agency. So we have all of these international players there, and our debt looks, my CFO will kill me for saying this, our debt looks well and truly achievable.
Yeah.
He'll be listening to this, but Dwayne, you still have a tough job, I know.
Yeah, that's their job, their department to sort all that out. Okay. And I mean, it's a fascinating thing. I'm sure this facility is meant to be accomplished in what sort of timeline? Is it in the next sort of 2 years?
Yeah, 2.5 years, just over 2.5 years, we should be in production.
And then when you're looking in the nitty-gritties of what it's actually doing, and I know there's a few projects and a few terms. I mean, the nickel and the cobalt are the main ones, but can you give a bit of insight into where they're sort of applied and how you actually produce them as well? Because I think that's something that even I'm looking at the words and I'm like, I really don't actually quite understand how it happens. So can you break down that process for me as well?
So the tech project and the direct nickel process, we will produce high purity nickel sulphate. So it's like 99.95% purity, super pure stuff. That goes directly into the manufacture of the cathodes in the lithium-ion batteries. The cathodes are the places where the current goes to sleep when the battery discharges. So the nickel and cobalt go directly into the manufacturing of the cathodes. So we supply directly to battery manufacturers. So we plug into that value chain directly. Hence LG and POSCO and the vehicle manufacturers who are moving upstream now, hence their interest in that as well. So the nickel and cobalt have a ready home. The direct nickel process has a major advantage over all other processes. All other processes will pull out the nickel and sometimes the cobalt as well, and then they leave the rest behind. And one of the leading technologies, competitor technologies, high-pressure acid leaching, produces up to 1.4 tons of tailings for every ton of ore it processes. You end up with more tailings than you end up with ore that you started with. We produce zero tailings because the direct nickel process, as I said, this nitric acid, the dog, it eats everything, and you spit out high-purity hematite. It's iron oxide, iron ore.
Yeah.
We pelletize that, sell it straight into clean steel making. The magnesium in the ore doesn't end up in the tailings. It ends up as a high-purity magnesia, which gets sold into chemicals and agriculture. What little residue we have that doesn't dissolve is effectively like beach sand.
Yeah.
And it goes straight into the engineered fill for construction and low-lying areas. And it displaces mined sand. So we end up with zero solids waste. Unheard of in this industry.
That's nuts. I mean, waste is a massive thing you need to get rid of. It's the crux of so many businesses is what do you do with all your waste and how can you make it profitable in a way, because otherwise it's just a waste of potential product.
A lot of the projects, Chinese, Indonesian projects, do not, when they quote their capital costs and operating costs, they do not include the cost of managing their waste, either because they're dumping it in the ocean or they just don't include it in the capital numbers. So people underestimate how expensive those plants are there. We include all of that in our capital and operating costs. All of our processed liquids are recycled. And you say, oh, you're such good guys. Well, it's got this valuable nitric acid in it. We're not going to throw it away.
Yeah.
We recycle it. And we are significantly negative carbon.
Optimizing every part of it. Yeah.
It's remarkable industrial ecology to have all three of these factors. I've been in this game 40 years. I've only ever seen a plant which has achieved one of three: negative carbon, zero solid waste, zero liquid waste. I've only ever seen projects that have achieved one of the three. To get 3 out of 3 is off the scale.
And the economic benefit of removing all your waste but reutilizing it is, I think, only other companies would dream of, because the listeners probably wouldn't quite understand how much money is spent on destroying or disposing of the waste in an ESG or an effective manner, and that has a price tag to it. And in a way, it's not very beneficial. It's just it has to be done. And if you can completely remove that, it's remarkable. It really quite is like the future trend of where businesses wish they could operate. But I can imagine that energy and keeping this machine or this facility online is quite intensive as well. And looking around at energy crisis is all you're hearing, and it's this big sort of discussion really. When you're looking at the facility, how are you going to manage the energy and the need for power in it?
So we have a subsidiary company called Queensland Pacific Metals Energy, or QPM Energy, and that is developing the gas supply. Now, we sit on the edge of the North Queensland gas pipeline. There's an existing gas pipeline that runs from the Northern Bowen Basin high-quality metallurgical coal mines straight up to Townsville. Used to supply the now shut-down Queensland nickel refinery. That pipeline's got 3 times the capacity that we need. It's running almost empty because there's no customer. And so you've got these very gassy metallurgical coal mines that are currently venting or flaring the gas for safety reasons, venting or flaring it, and there is no customer. Lo and behold, along comes a big customer. We work with those resources, put the gas into the pipeline. That's our gas supply. That is a stranded gas asset. It is not connected to the Australian East Coast gas network. So that's why they vent or flare. There is no customer. We're the customer. It is just manna from heaven. It is
Well, I was gonna another
synergy.
golden opportunity in regards to, energy would arguably one probably the biggest expense for operating a facility like this. And if, you already got those pathways to secure pretty much confirmed energy supply in a way, it's a massive relief. Of course, there's probably stresses revolved in getting that actually organized and the whole logistics side of it. And I'm sure there's a lot more information on that, but that's just a huge sort of tick box in a way that you can secure the energy.
Yeah, it's the Commonwealth government's recent legislation around the safeguard mechanism actually is more wind in our sails, because these high quality metallurgical coal mines, and they're going to be producing this coal for steel making for a long time to come. And life cycle analysis, they're actually good for steel making because they're a lot cleaner than the junk that you get from the rest of the world. But all this gas needs to find a home, or they're paying for it.
Yeah.
Because under the safeguard mechanism, they've got to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. We stop them venting methane, which has got a global warming potential of 30 times carbon dioxide. So we capture that and we turn it into a value-added product and substantially reduce global and local greenhouse gas emissions. Our greenhouse gas intensity is nearly minus 40 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of nickel. That's minus 40 kilograms of CO2 taken out of the atmosphere for every kilogram of nickel we produce. The global average is around about 15 to 20 plus.
Jeez.
So we've gone from plus 20 to minus 40, and that plus 20 excludes the Chinese and Indonesian production because some obscure reason they don't provide data.
Exactly. They're not involved in those discussions. So, that floats the idea that these days investors and big groups are all looking at ESG as almost foundations for investments. And of course, there's the flip of the coin for both sides of that argument, but clearly QPM is ticking all those boxes. How does that imply, or how does that help QPM in the objective of, again, securing potential funding in the future, or just from an investment point of view, complying with ESG, which is a big sort of requirement now?
So ESG doesn't mean you've got a great project. That's a qualifying tick going forward. You still have to have good capital costs, good operating costs, fast to market, reliability of supply, consistency in quality. Quality is especially important in the battery game. You've got to have all of that. But from about 2026 onwards, when European Union regulations come into force, you, Ben, are going to be able to walk into the showroom in Frankfurt or London or wherever it happens to be, scan the QR code, it'll tell you the greenhouse gas intensity, the water use, the transparency, gender, diversity, child mining, sulfur dioxide pollution, etc. I was talking to one company that's developing metrics around this, which will be reported, 65 ESG metrics they are developing and tracking, and you'll be able to go into the showroom in a few years' time, scan the QR code, and it'll tell you. So this is driven by European and North American customers who care where the nickel and the cobalt and the graphite and the copper and everything else comes from that's in their electric vehicle. So you have to meet those criteria to have access to the market. Will there be a major premium for clean production? There probably will be a premium. My personal view is it's not going to be huge. In our financial model, we don't factor a premium in, but there's a good chance there will be a premium. But you're not going to be able to sell it into those countries unless you meet those criteria.
Yeah, and thinking again that I hadn't heard of that before, and that will be insane in regards to people going up and being able to, at the touch of their phone, get access to all this information about exactly where all the parts and all the ingredients for their car or cell phone or whatever has come from. That's going to revolutionize the shopping experience, and we're on the way there. And I think for a lot of listeners, it sounds very distant, but reality, it's not going to be that far away. And when we're looking in regards to other products that QPM might be able to sort of transition towards, because we know it's an ever-changing market, and it was almost like the electric vehicle demand came out of the blue. It's always been there, but suddenly it was just what everyone wanted. Is there applications for the business to change potential sort of strategies and focuses depending on how the market adjusts? Or again, are you guys already just sort of happy with the EV market, which is, again, a huge market to fill?
Our primary focus is the EV market. Some of our co-products, like the hematite, will go into steel making and magnesia into other products. And high purity alumina is one of our important co-products, about 10% of our revenue. That goes into LED lighting. LED lighting is favored because it's low energy, high efficiency lighting and lower total cost of ownership. The International Energy Agency and the developed countries have agreed to phase out fluorescent lighting. So LED lighting is a big growth area that uses high purity alumina. But our main focus is in the battery market. At 14% of global sales, electric vehicles in cars, that is only at the start of the S-curve. And I haven't even started on scooters, motorbikes, and more importantly, buses and trucks. A huge demand. Trucks, I might include in that the EV Hummer that we were talking about.
Yes, yeah. This was an interesting one you were saying before, yeah.
So, and for the environmentalists who are listening, as one environmental group said, people shouldn't drive big vehicles like Hummers, but if they are going to drive them, they should at least be electric. So, electric Hummer that I sat in, 4.5 tons, 0 to 100 in 3 seconds. US EPA fuel efficiency equivalent, so that's charging it off the US grid with a mixture of coal and gas and nuclear and wind and solar.
Yeah.
It gets something like 49 miles per gallon equivalent. This is a 4.5 ton truck that does 0 to 103 seconds. So you see the environmental advantages.
Yeah.
But if you're a petrol head at the moment, you'll become a battery head.
Yeah, with just the power.
The center of gravity sits underneath you. There's no lag through a transmission. 0 to 100 in vapor speed. The driving performance is phenomenal. Greenhouse, we've already talked about that. But if you go up to the hills in Perth, where we're at the moment, you look down at Perth, and Perth's a clean and windy city, you'll see a haze. And that haze is primarily from internal combustion engines. That PM2.5 and those pollutants affect quality of life. Less so in Perth, of course, but in big cities around the world, EVs are a solution for the shortening of lifespan and damaging of children through urban air quality.
And I mean, again, back to the truck that you're mentioning, that not the Hummer, but the actual big trucks that are moving products and services all across. When I was in Europe, they're everywhere. And it's a huge amount of transitioning between fossil fuel to electric. And I mean, it's not going to be cheap naturally, and there's going to be a hell of a lot of demand needed to build all these engines and these batteries. But there is just so much potential, and the buses, and then even thinking further ahead, all these cars are going to naturally need some charging stations. So then there's infrastructure, and then it's instead of gas stations, they literally become charging EV stations, and then it's all about optimizing how quick you can charge it, and there's so many factors that are going to be improved. And I mean, for QPM to be positioned in such a, pretty much from start to finish, everything really ticked and ready to go. Now it's just about, again, putting in the hard working, making sure that these offtakes can be achieved, and that, the customer are happy, and then who knows where the future is. But I mean, what makes you so excited about working at QPM, and where do you see the potential future going for the company?
The excitement is being part of a growth industry, a significant growth industry. And we've already talked about the volume growth. The CAGR for nickel into the battery industry has got a CAGR of 20 to 30%, depending upon whose estimate you believe. That is huge. I mean, absolutely huge. Now, nickel itself overall is 4 or 5, which is pretty healthy. But so you're at the start of that. But we're also at the start of the transition where good ESG performance is moving from desirable to mandatory. And so to be a part of that, the timing is just right. That's exciting to be involved in that. We're in a tier 1 jurisdiction. We have a free trade agreement with the United States, and President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act primes the pump. Anyone who's got an FTA with the US now becomes part of their supply chain, a favored part of that supply chain. By the way, our agreement with GM was finalized before that Inflation Reduction Act came out. So GM made that move not because of the IRA,
the benefits,
but because of our ESG near-to-market clean production.
Yeah, there's a lot to happen, and we didn't even touch on the team that you've got, but what's so great about the team that you've got at QPM?
So I'll talk about de-risking projects. The biggest thing we've done for de-risking is to partner with tier one equipment and technology suppliers, and we did that very early on. We're not going out to competitive tender on our key process technologies and equipment. We've targeted and partnered with, these are formal agreements, to jointly share the development with the tier one equipment providers. That is a huge risk reduction, massive. The next biggest thing you can do to reduce risk is to have good people. And we are lucky, I am lucky, that we have not just some of the best people in Australia in this game, but some of the best people in the world. So we've got an elite team, and I don't use that word casually. I've worked for great companies, Alcoa, Rio Tinto, BHP, fantastic companies, great people. While in a junior company to have people of that caliber is unusual, and we are really, really lucky across our whole executive team, our technical team. We've got some of the best in the game.
Fantastic. And for listeners that want to learn more about QPN and follow you in particular, where can they go? Where can they get more information about the company progressing?
So our website, we try to do a good job keeping that up to date. We're busy developing the project, and so sometimes we don't go for glitz and gloss, but our website is quite informative. QPM website, it's got all the updates and corporate presentations and some news flow.
Beautiful. And I was going to suggest if listeners have any other questions, I'm sure there's going to be an email on there they can contact and reach out and ask away. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to speak with me in person in Perth. I know you'll be flying back to Queensland to get back into the company and back into tech. You've probably been working here anyway, but I look forward to catching up. Hopefully you come back in the next sort of 6 to 12 months and we can revisit the conversation and see how QPM is progressing. So thank you for joining me today.
Right. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching the Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.